The lamps are lit at the village pub, the rain's easing off, and another Agatha Raisin mystery is about to unfold. Do tell us, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and if you've not subscribed yet, go on. Pull up a chair and join us for every case to come. Let's step inside, shall we? It was the sort of Cotswold morning that pretended to be spring but wasn't quite convinced. A thin drizzle hung in the hedgerows, and the daffodils along Castley's green bowed as if acknowledging defeat. Inside her cottage, Agatha Raisin sat at the kitchen table in her dressing gown, glaring at a piece of cold toast and wondering, not for the first time, why life insisted on being so ordinary when she was perfectly suited to drama. Hodge, sprawled on the windowsill, gave a lazy flick of the tail. He had endured many of Agatha's moods and found them all unprofitable. She lit a cigarette, exhaled a plume of defiance, and reached for the phone. No message on the answering machine, not even from Roy, who usually rang to announce his own brilliance. The weekend had stretched long and empty, and now Monday had the insolence to begin as if nothing were wrong. The radio, left muttering in the background, caught her ear. A woman's body discovered early this morning near Dembley, believed to be local resident Jessica Tate. Agatha straightened. Jessica Tate. She knew that name. Self-appointed moral guardian, chronic letter writer to the Mercester Echo, a woman of vigorous opinions about litter, lewd television, and the moral decay of youth. Agatha had crossed swords with her once at a parish meeting. Jessica had accused Agatha of promoting city vanity in a village setting. The memory still stung. She turned up the volume, but the announcer had moved on to football results. "Trust them," she muttered. "Murder before breakfast and they can't be bothered to linger." A knock at the door interrupted her indignation. Charles Fraith, looking infuriatingly fresh in a tweed jacket and that expression of aristocratic nonchalance he probably practiced in the mirror, stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "Morning, Agatha. You look as though you fought a small war." "I have," she said darkly. "Against toast," he grinned. "You've heard the news, I suppose." "Of course I have. Jessica Tate, dead. I always said hiking was dangerous." Charles helped himself to coffee. "She used to rent one of my fields for those walking people, the Dembley Hiking Club, enthusiasts of mud and self-righteousness." Agatha's curiosity, dormant for exactly 20 minutes, awoke. "You mean the sort that wears socks over trousers and calls it character building?" "The same. Apparently they found her near the stile leading to my land. Police everywhere this morning. Bill Wong looked positively harassed." "Good," said Agatha, brightening. "He could do with a bit of excitement." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You could too." She gave him a narrow look. "Meaning?" "Meaning you've been brooding. One can hear the boredom all the way from Evesham." Agatha bristled, but he wasn't wrong. She imagined herself striding heroically across fields, solving murders between sips of thermos tea. Then she imagined the mud and shuddered. "Still," she said, "a murder's a murder. Someone ought to look into it." "The police, perhaps?" "Oh, don't be tiresome." She stubbed out her cigarette. "Where's the initiative? The human interest?" Charles smiled. "You, my dear, are incorrigible." Later that morning the village buzzed. At the grocer's, Doris Simpson was whispering to Mrs. Bloxby near the onions. "Terrible business, Mrs. Bloxby. Head bashed in, they say, and such a healthy woman too." Mrs. Bloxby, serene as ever, replied, "Poor soul, perhaps she disturbed someone while walking." Agatha entered in search of gossip thinly disguised as milk. "It's always the ones who insist on fresh air," she said. "Air's vastly overrated." Mrs. Bloxby's gentle eyes twinkled. "Agatha, I hope you're not thinking of investigating." "I? Certainly not, unless someone asks me." "Of course," murmured Mrs. Bloxby, clearly unconvinced. By afternoon the drizzle had thickened into honest rain. Agatha sat by the fire, restless. She could picture Jessica Tate lecturing the Almighty on proper composting even in heaven. Yet something about the death nagged at her. Jessica had been bossy but not suicidal. A fool, the police would say. People always fell conveniently when no one wanted trouble. She dialed the Mercester station. Bill Wong's weary voice answered. "Agatha, don't tell me you've taken up hiking." "Don't be absurd. I wanted to know about Jessica Tate." A sigh. "You and half the Cotswolds. Preliminary report says accidental death." "Preliminary twaddle," Agatha retorted. "She had enemies. She offended for sport." which is not, last I checked, a motive for murder. You'd be surprised, he laughed softly. Leave it, Agatha. Go bake something. I'd rather die. Just don't do it near Dembley, he said, and hung up. She glared at the receiver. Typical male condescension. Bake indeed. She hadn't baked since the Thatcher era, and it had ended in smoke and recrimination. Hodge mewed, unimpressed by feminist outrage, and padded to his bowl. She poured him milk, muttering, "You'd think I was past caring, wouldn't you? Well, I'm not." Evening brought the weekly WI meeting in the village hall, an event Agatha attended only to remind herself she still had a social life of sorts. The hall smelt faintly of disinfectant and scones. Mrs. Bloxby presided. Agatha sat near the back, arms folded, surveying the ranks of sensible cardigans. Talk inevitably turned to Dembley. Poor Jessica, sighed one member. She only wanted to make that club more inclusive. Inclusive? Snorted another. She meant bossy. You couldn't plan a picnic without her measuring everyone's sandwiches. Laughter rippled. Agatha joined in, a beat too loud. Then a plump woman with permed hair turned towards her. You don't walk, do you, Mrs. Raisin? Always see you in the car. Agatha's smile froze. I walk when it's worth it. Oh, I just thought, well, you're not the outdoor type. The remark landed like a slap. Agatha felt heat rise to her cheeks. Around her, teacups clinked. Mrs. Bloxby shot her a warning glance, but it was too late. I'll have you know, Agatha said crisply, that I am a great believer in exercise, particularly when it leads somewhere. A few polite titters followed. The woman murmured an apology, but Agatha barely heard it. Her pride had been pricked, and that was fatal. She lit a cigarette outside afterward, the night damp and smelling of crushed daffodils, and stared towards the dark fields beyond the village. Somewhere out there lay Jessica Tate, the moral reformer struck down among her good deeds. Agatha exhaled smoke and made a private vow. She would find out what happened to Jessica Tate, and she would do it while proving that she, Agatha Raisin, could outwalk, outthink, and outgossip every sanctimonious villager in the Cotswolds. Behind her, Hodge watched from the window, his tail twitching. He had seen this look before. The glint that meant trouble was lacing up its boots. The following Saturday dawned grey and damp, the sort of day only optimists or lunatics would call bracing. Agatha Raisin, staring at herself in the mirror, decided she looked more like a misplaced tourist than a country walker. The new hiking boots pinched, the waterproof jacket squeaked, and the woolen hat sat on her head like a personal insult. Hodge, perched on the bed, watched in silent disbelief as she attempted to tuck her trousers into her socks. Don't sneer, she told him. I'm going undercover. The cat yawned, unimpressed. By mid-morning, she had parked her small car outside the Rambler's Rest, the Dembley pub where the hiking club held its weekly meetings. Rain glistened on the signboard, a painted boot striding across a hill, while inside came the sound of hearty laughter and mugs colliding. Agatha squared her shoulders, stepped in, and immediately regretted it. The warmth hit her like a wet rug. The air smelt of damp coats, fried bacon, and moral superiority. Around a cluster of tables sat the members, an assortment of ruddy-faced people in expensive outdoor gear. Their cheerfulness felt rehearsed, like a hymn sung without conviction. "Ah, a new recruit," cried a tall woman with the unflinching brightness of a headmistress. "Deborah Camden, club secretary." "Agatha Raisin," said Agatha, attempting confidence. "Carsley, I'm, keen on walking." A man with a florid face and a self-satisfied tie extended his hand. "Martin Elgood, solicitor. Welcome to our humble fellowship." Next came Mrs. Withers, a widow in beige anorak and moral certainty, who murmured, "So good of you to join us, dear. Such a wholesome hobby." Agatha caught a wink from the group's guide, Gary Beach, a tanned young man with too much confidence and too little restraint. "You'll keep up, won't you?" he said. "Some find the hills challenging." She gave him a look capable of curdling milk. "I've faced bigger challenges than hills." The remark earned a few polite laughs and one audible sniff from Mrs. Withers. Deborah clapped briskly. "Before we set off, a minute's silence for Jessica Tate." The room stilled. Agatha lowered her head, though mostly to hide her expression. Deborah's voice trembled with official emotion. "Jessica was one of our founding members, a woman of strong opinions and stronger calves. We'll miss her. Martin coughed. Still, life must go on. The club can't dissolve every time someone trips. Agatha opened one eye. The sympathy in the room had the half-life of a scone. After the perfunctory silence, Deborah produced a clipboard. Today's route will take us across Dovedale Ridge, past Fraith Field and back along the brook. Gary will lead. Please note, no shortcuts and no detours. Agatha sipped the instant coffee she'd been handed. It tasted faintly of despair. On the wall behind Deborah hung a large map, pinned crookedly, with red trails traced in neat lines. One trail, marked with a faded X, ran directly across the field where Jessica's body had been found. She moved closer, pretending interest. That's quite a distance, Deborah nodded. Jessica planned the routes. She liked to make them demanding. I imagine she made everything demanding, said Martin dryly. The walk began with what Agatha privately labelled the public humiliation. Within 5 minutes she was puffing, the boots rubbing her heels raw. The others strode ahead with the self-righteous vigour of people who took vitamins voluntarily. Charles Fraith would have laughed himself hoarse, she thought grimly. Deborah lingered beside her, all false encouragement. You're doing marvellously. Don't worry, it's just a gentle incline. Gentle incline, muttered Agatha. Gentle my foot. At the top of the hill they paused for breath, or in Agatha's case, resuscitation. The countryside stretched in drab greens and browns under a sullen sky. Somewhere beyond the hedge lay the field where Jessica Tate had fallen. Agatha peered down at the path, noting how narrow and slippery it was. One careless shove would do it. She filed the thought away. Gary, ever the showman, pointed with his walking stick. That stile down there's where they found her. Tragic, really. We all told her not to walk alone. Mrs. Withers crossed herself. She was too modern, always talking of reform and fairness. Fairness never got anyone fit, said Martin, chuckling. Agatha, wiping rain from her fringe, asked, Did she have enemies? Oh, Jessica managed to irritate everyone equally, Deborah said briskly. She tried to get the club to admit more locals. Farmers' wives, teenagers, that sort. Said we were becoming elitist. Agatha feigned shock. Surely not. Quite, said Martin. She'd have had us tramping with ramshackle types and dogs. Utter chaos. They resumed walking. Mud sucked at Agatha's boots with affectionate malice. The group spread out, Gary at the front, Deborah chatting to Mrs. Withers, Martin pontificating about property rights. Agatha, pretending to adjust her laces, lingered near the stile. The earth there looked freshly disturbed. A broken twig caught her eye, too neatly snapped to be natural. She bent to examine it, but Deborah's voice rang out. Mrs. Raisin, do keep up. By the time they trudged back to the Rambler's Rest, Agatha was wet, sore, and furious. Inside, steam rose from damp clothing like ghosts of better days. Pints appeared. Conversation turned cheerfully mundane. Aching knees, failed diets, and the scandal of Jessica's will, which it seemed had left her collection of guidebooks to the parish library, in perpetuity. Martin leaned towards Agatha. You're not one of those reporters, are you? Good heavens, no. I sell— She paused, considering. Ideas. He looked doubtful. Ah, consultant. Agatha smiled thinly. It was close enough. As they dispersed, she lingered by the bar. The map still hung on the wall, slightly askew, its red trails gleaming in lamplight. She noticed that someone had rubbed out part of the pencil mark near the stile. When she turned to fetch her coat, a draught blew through the door. By the time she looked again, the map was gone. Excuse me, she told the barman. Where's that walking map gone? He frowned. Which map? The one that was hanging right there. Never had one, love. She stared at the clean square of wall, the faint trace of dust where it had hung. Someone had been quick. Too quick. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the road slick and glistening. Agatha stood under the pub sign, breathing in the smell of wet stone and smoke. Behind her, laughter echoed faintly through the door, that brittle kind that covered secrets rather than shared them. She buttoned her jacket, wincing as the zip caught. All right, Jessica Tate, she murmured. You irritating saint. Let's see what you were really up to. Back in Carsley, Hodge waited by the fire, tail twitching. When she entered, dripping mud across the carpet, he meowed once, an eloquent summary of her day. Oh, hush, said Agatha, kicking off the boots. It's detective work, not a spa treatment. She poured herself a generous gin, the clink of ice loud in the quiet room, and smiled grimly at her reflection in the dark window. Somewhere between vanity and vengeance, curiosity had taken hold, and once that happened, not even the Cotswold mud could stop her. After the muddy trudge and that stolen map fragment, morning in Castley arrived in a soft drizzle that promised nothing and delivered less. The lane outside Agatha Raisin's cottage gleamed with puddles, and the scent of damp earth drifted through the cracked kitchen window. Hodge sat on the windowsill, observing a robin with the professional disdain of one who would never lower himself to such vulgar fluttering. Agatha, however, was in full swing, hair set, cigarette smouldering, and the telephone receiver clamped between shoulder and chin. "Yes, I did walk," she snapped into the line. "Up a hill, in the rain, with idiots." A pause. "No, Mrs. Bloxby, I didn't enjoy the exercise. I enjoyed the gin afterwards." She replaced the receiver, sniffed, and poured herself more coffee. The memory of yesterday's outing still smarted, the smirks, the insinuations that she couldn't tell a bridle path from a garden centre. Yet somewhere beneath her vanity glowed satisfaction. She had seen that missing map, and she'd noticed the clean patch of wall. Someone hadn't wanted it visible. The knock at the door came just as she was considering a second cigarette. Bill Wong stood on the step, dripping rain from his Mac, and looking resigned to regret his visit. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. May I come in?" "If you must," said Agatha, hiding her surprise. "I'd offer you coffee, but it's dreadful." He stepped inside, scanning the cluttered coziness of the cottage, books half read, muddy boots abandoned, Hodge flicking his tail like a disapproving butler. "Officially," said Bill, lowering himself onto a chair, "Jessica Tate's death is being filed as an accident." "And unofficially?" Agatha demanded, sitting opposite with the expectant poise of someone auditioning for the role of confidential advisor. Bill hesitated. "Off the record, there are questions. The head injuries don't match a fall. It's murder," she supplied, eyes bright. "I didn't say that, but it's possible she was struck before she fell." Agatha gave a little gasp of triumph. "I knew it. You see, Bill, that's intuition. Some of us are born with it." He smiled faintly. "And some of us prefer evidence. Oh, don't be stuffy. I noticed plenty. Attitudes, evasions, that missing map. You policemen never see what's under your noses." Bill raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Hypocrisy," she said. "Country people are full of it. We're all one big happy community, they say, then stab you with a cake fork if you sit in their pew." He laughed despite himself. "I'll remember that at the next parish fete." Agatha leaned forward, her voice softening. "You really think someone killed her?" "Possibly, but we've no witnesses, no weapon, no clear motive. And before you ask, no, we can't make an arrest on gossip and hunches." "Then it's lucky you've got me," said Agatha smugly. "Unlucky, more like." Bill rose, collecting his coat. "Do me a favour, Agatha. Leave this one to the professionals." She followed him to the door. Professionals never have the nerve to ask the right people. You'd be amazed what they'll say to a woman with a friendly smile. "You mean a nosy one," he said over his shoulder. "Semantics," she replied. When he had gone, she stood a moment in the quiet. Rain whispered against the window. Hodge stretched, unconcerned. Agatha lit another cigarette and stared at the smoke. Bill had confided in her, almost. That counted as consultation in her view. She smiled. "Evidence, my foot." Later that afternoon, Mrs. Bloxby arrived with a basket of scones and that look of gentle concern which Agatha both craved and resented. "I met Bill Wong on the lane," said the vicar's wife mildly. "He mentioned he'd been here." "Did he now?" Agatha tried to sound casual and failed. "Purely social, of course. He values my perspective." Mrs. Bloxby poured tea. "I do hope you won't involve yourself too much, Agatha. You know what happens when you do." Agatha drew herself up. "Are you suggesting I'm accident-prone?" "Not you. Circumstances. People who meddle in such things sometimes get hurt." Agatha sniffed. "I'm hardly the village simpleton. Besides, the poor woman deserves justice." "Of course," said Mrs. Bloxby softly. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I'm always careful." This was not true, and both women knew it. When Mrs. Bloxby left, Agatha decided she could hardly investigate without proper equipment. Within an hour she had spread an alarming collection across the sofa. A compass, a whistle, binoculars, and a foldable seat she'd bought from a camping catalogue during a moment of misplaced optimism. She examined each item as though preparing for Everest. "You can't outwit a murderer in inadequate footwear," she told Hodge, who blinked and resumed washing his paw. The phone rang again. Doris Simpson, her cleaner, with the bright relish of one bearing fresh scandal. "Mrs. Raisin, they're saying down the Red Lion you've been sniffing round the police again." "Who's they?" "Everyone, really. Mrs. Cartwright swears she saw you and that inspector in your nightie." Agatha choked. "In my nightie? Or maybe it were a dressing gown. Anyway, there's talk." "There's always talk," Agatha said grimly. When she hung up, she considered the situation. Half the village thought her a meddler, the other half a romantic fool chasing policemen. Both assessments were intolerable. The only remedy, naturally, was to solve the case before anyone else. Evening drew in. She poured herself a small gin, switched on the lamp and reviewed her notes, a few scribbled remarks on pub gossip and one sketch of the missing map. The more she stared, the clearer it seemed. Someone in that hiking club was hiding something, and the disappearance of the map was the key. With a yawn, she went to fetch her boots from the hallway. They were still muddy from the walk, but she tugged them on anyway, testing the fit. Something crinkled against her foot. She frowned, pulled off the boot, and shook it. A folded scrap of paper fell out. She winced, remembering she'd left the back door on the latch last night. Someone had been inside. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. Ask about the map. But not at the pub. Agatha's heart gave a little leap, triumph mixed with unease. So someone knew she'd noticed. Someone had been in her things, close enough to plant the note. She glanced around the dimly lit room, absurdly conscious of shadows. Then she laughed aloud, though her voice sounded brittle. "All right," she told Hodge. "If they want to play games, we'll play." Hodge, unimpressed by conspiracy, leapt onto the armchair and began to purr. Agatha sat beside him, cigarette trembling slightly in her fingers, and watched the smoke curl towards the ceiling. For once, her reflection in the window didn't look bored, only wary and quietly pleased. "Ask about the map," she murmured, "but not at the pub. Well, we'll see about that." Outside, the drizzle thickened again, tracing silver threads down the glass. Inside, Hodge yawned, and Agatha, despite herself, smiled, a small, sharp smile that promised trouble. The next morning broke with watery sunlight, the sort that pretends cheerfulness while dripping steadily off the eaves. Agatha Raisin stood at her gate in a tweed jacket she had found at the back of the wardrobe, and decided she looked rustic enough to fool anyone. Hodge, watching through the parlour window, disagreed. She slammed the gate, marched to her car, and headed for Charles Fraith's manor. If she were going to hike again, she might as well have company, preferably the kind who could pay for lunch. Charles opened the door in corduroys and that amused expression he reserved for her more alarming ideas. "We're going for a walk," announced Agatha. "Good heavens, why?" "Health," she said firmly. "Yours or mine?" "Both, and perhaps a bit of murder on the side." He sighed. "I knew that body would end my peace." The fields beyond Dembley were still slick with rain. Larks trilled somewhere high above, indifferent to human folly. Agatha trudged through mud with a martyr's dignity, cigarette clamped between her teeth, while Charles sauntered behind as though strolling through one of his own meadows. "So," he said, "what's the plan? Confront the killer with your walking stick?" "Observation, Charles. People always talk more outdoors. It's the wind. Loosens the tongue." Ahead, two figures were already arguing, Deborah Camden and Martin Elgood, both red-cheeked from exertion and indignation. "You've no authority to change the routes," Martin barked. "Jessica asked me to," said Deborah. "Before she died, she wanted shorter paths for the older members." "She wanted control," he retorted. "Now she's gone, we'll do things properly." Agatha slowed. "Friendly lot, aren't they?" she murmured. "English country life," said Charles, all seething civility. When they drew level, Deborah offered a bright, brittle smile. "Out for another ramble, Mrs. Raisin? How admirable!" "Trying to keep up my figure," Agatha replied. Martin gave a snort. "Careful near the stile ahead. Bad footing there." Agatha's eyes sharpened. "Where she fell." He hesitated. "Yes, the police cleared it." They moved on, leaving the tension hanging like mist. The stile lay crooked between two hedges, one post splintered, the other newly nailed. Charles crouched, inspecting the ground. "Look here," he said. "Fresh boot print. Not from your dainty size 6, I presume." Agatha peered. The impression was deep, crisp, and recent. "Someone's been back since the police left." "Or," said Charles, straightening, "you're seeing conspiracies where there's only mud." "Mud doesn't erase itself," she retorted. "Neither do secrets." They followed the ridge path in silence until Dembley came into view, roofs gleaming after rain, smoke curling from the Rambler's Rest chimney. The pub looked almost welcoming, though Agatha had already learned its warmth was purely decorative. Inside, the same crowd occupied the same tables, as though fear had a seating plan. Pauline Gifford, the landlady, stood behind the bar with a smile too tight to trust. Agatha shook off her coat. "Good morning, everyone. You must be relieved. The police say poor Jessica's death was accidental." Several heads turned, none quite meeting her eye. Martin muttered, "Tragic business, yes. Best not dwell." "Oh, but we must," said Agatha brightly. "Closure and all that. Terribly modern concept." Charles leaned on the counter, enjoying himself. "I told Agatha there's no better way to recover from trauma than a pub lunch." "That'll be the chicken pie, then," said Pauline shortly. Agatha's gaze wandered to the wall where the map had once hung. A faint square of lighter wood marked its absence, the edges outlined by years of smoke and polish. "Funny thing," she said, voice airy. "I could swear there used to be a map right there." Conversation stopped as neatly as if someone had cut a wire. Even the clock seemed to pause. Pauline's smile thinned. "It fell off, Mrs. Raisin. Frame broke." "Oh dear," said Agatha. "Such a pity. It looked so well loved. Years, I'd say." Pauline's eyes narrowed. "Old rubbish, really. Needed replacing." "Still," murmured Agatha, "maps can be sentimental. People get attached to their roots." From the corner, Deborah said sharply, "What are you implying?" "Nothing at all," Agatha replied, producing her most innocent look, the one that usually preceded disaster. Martin muttered something about amateur detectives. Gary Beach, the handsome guide, laughed too loudly. The brittle camaraderie broke like glass. Charles, sensing imminent explosion, raised his glass. "To healthy exercise," he declared. "And to fresh air," added Agatha sweetly. "Kills fewer people than one might think." They left soon after, escorted by silence. Outside, the wind had risen, tugging at the pub sign. Agatha stopped on the path. "Well?" "You managed to alienate an entire village before pudding," said Charles. "A new record." "Rubbish. They're hiding something. That landlady practically twitched when I mentioned the map." "Or perhaps she dislikes inquisitive women in hats," Agatha sniffed. "You'd think in the 90s people would be past that." "They're not even past rationing," he said. Back at the car, Agatha paused to light a cigarette. Smoke curled away in the chill air. She stared back at the pub, mind ticking. The missing map, the quarrels, the fresh boot print. Each piece nudged another. Charles climbed in beside her. "You know," he said, "one day you'll provoke the wrong person." "I already have. The right one." He gave her a sidelong smile. "Then do me a favour. At least wear something the coroner will describe as tasteful." She laughed despite herself. "Drive, Charles." Twilight found her home again in Carsley. The cottage glowed with firelight and the faint smell of damp wool. She fed Hodge, poured herself gin, and replayed the afternoon's conversations in her head. Pauline's tone, Martin's defensiveness, Deborah's sharpness, all spoke of guilt, though not necessarily murder. She was scribbling notes when the doorbell rang. Few people used it. Most locals knocked as if ashamed of intrusion. Agatha frowned, went to the hall, and opened the door. No one there. She stepped out. The lane lay empty under the sodium glow of the street lamp. Somewhere a dog barked. On the mat, a plain brown envelope. Inside, a torn corner of heavy paper, stiff and faintly greasy, part of a map, the same cheap frame stock as the Rambler's Rest wall map. Agatha stared, heart thudding. She brought it under the lamp. The fragment bore a red line, one of the walking routes, ending abruptly at what must have been the stile. Someone had ripped it away deliberately. Hodge meowed behind her, impatient for attention. She turned, still holding the paper. "Well, my boy," she said softly, "either someone's trying to help me, or they're warning me off." Hodge sniffed, clearly preferring tuna to intrigue. Agatha placed the fragment on the mantelpiece, next to the photograph of herself shaking hands with the Mercester Rotary Club president, an image she now regarded as proof of questionable judgment. She lit another cigarette and watched the smoke drift upwards. Outside, the drizzle began again, soft but relentless, erasing footprints before dawn. "Maps fall off walls, do they?" she murmured. "Not this one." Hodge stretched, turned twice, and settled in his basket. The fire hissed, the cottage sighed, and Agatha, smiling faintly, thought that for all its perils the countryside at least kept life interesting. By midweek the drizzle had decided to stay. Carsley glistened under a grey film, its cottages beaded with rain like pastries under glass. Yet the gloom did little to dampen gossip. In the shop, the post office and the Red Lion bar, voices lowered and heads leaned close. Jessica Tate's death had ripened into scandal. Agatha Raisin, never one to let a rumour mature without tasting it, lingered at the grocer's longer than her shopping required. Doris Simpson was whispering to Mrs. Bloxby by the onions again. "They're saying Jessica had secrets," Doris confided. "Proper nasty business. Her paper's all gone missing too." Mrs. Bloxby sighed. Perhaps someone needed privacy more than honesty. Agatha, paying for milk she didn't want, joined the conversation with cheerful malice. "Oh, nonsense, people exaggerate. Still, if any of those papers mention names—" "They often do," Doris said darkly. When Agatha left, she felt a prickling satisfaction. The village had turned restless. Nothing pleased her more than being slightly ahead of everyone else. That evening, while she was plotting her next move over gin, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Roy Silver, hair immaculate, coat gleaming with London rain, holding an overnight bag and a smile that should have come with a health warning. "Darling Aggie, I couldn't bear it any longer. All this drama in the provinces without me." Agatha stared. "Roy, you hate the provinces. You once said the Cotswolds smelled of cows and repression." "I was younger then," he said airily, stepping past her. "Besides, the press in town are bored stiff. Woman found dead in field. I smell syndication." "You smell trouble," said Agatha, but she was secretly pleased. Loneliness like mildew had been setting in. Roy dropped his bag, surveyed her cottage, and said, "Honestly, darling, you're one puddle away from mildew. I shall save you." "You'll save yourself a guest room with a broken radiator. Don't whine." Hodge appeared, tail twitching, and Roy yelped. "Still got the miniature panther. Does he eat visitors?" "Only shallow ones," said Agatha. Roy wrinkled his nose. "That'll be a diet problem then." By dinner time they were ensconced at the Red Lion, Roy resplendent in a silk scarf, and Agatha in her best attempt at sophistication, which she suspected looked more like aggression. The fire crackled. Locals pretended not to stare. Roy ordered wine as if auditioning for a scandal. "2 glasses of your least provincial Chardonnay, my good man." The landlord blinked. "We've got one from Gloucester." "Perfect," said Roy. "That's practically abroad." At the next table sat Deborah Camden, the Dembley schoolteacher, nursing half a cider. She smiled politely. "Mrs. Raisin, isn't it? I heard you were quite the walker these days." "Intermittent," said Agatha. Roy leaned forward, his voice like butter. "And you, my dear, must be one of those splendid country intellectuals who read maps for pleasure." Deborah flushed. "I wouldn't say that." "Nonsense. Clever women always underestimate themselves. Tell me, what really happened to poor Jessica?" Agatha shot him a warning look, but it was too late. Deborah's expression flickered. Guilt, irritation, something close to fear. She lowered her voice. "She was looking into some land ownership business. Footpaths, leases, that sort of thing. Charles Fraith's name came up, but that's all I know." "Charles," said Agatha. "My Charles." Roy arched an eyebrow. "Your Charles? Oh, don't start. He's a friend." "A titled friend who could afford a proper dinner," murmured Roy. Agatha ignored him, but her mind was racing. Land disputes. Jessica Tate had been moral, not mercenary. If she'd found irregularities on Charles's property, that could ruffle feathers. And Charles, though charming, had the scruples of a fox in a henhouse. Deborah rose soon after, muttering something about early lessons. When she'd gone, Roy grinned. "Well, that was productive. You charm the corpses, I charm the living." "You charm the headlines," Agatha retorted. "And if you breathe a word to the papers, relax, darling. I'm here purely for artistic inspiration. You solve the mystery, I'll handle the rights." Mrs. Bloxby stopped by their table on her way out, shawl wrapped tight against the drizzle. "Evening, Agatha, Mr. Silver." "Mrs. Bloxby," Roy cried. "You're the moral compass, aren't you? You look like someone who writes to the Times about declining standards." "Occasionally to the Church Gazette," she said, smiling. Agatha, sensing mischief, asked, "Tell us, Mrs. Bloxby, what's your take on Jessica's saintly do-gooding?" Mrs. Bloxby's tone was mild, but her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes goodness is a mask for pride, and sometimes greed dresses as public duty." Roy whispered, "She's marvellous. Can we keep her?" "No," said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. Mrs. Bloxby patted her shoulder. "Just be careful, dear. When people gossip, truth becomes the first casualty." Agatha exhaled smoke. In Carsley, truth was never a favourite anyway. Later the rain worsened, drumming on the pub windows like typewriters. The wine bottle dwindled, Roy's stories grew outrageous, and Agatha's good sense slipped quietly out the back door. "I'm telling you," she said, waving her glass, "it all goes back to that map. Someone removed it, and then someone sends me a bit of it through the post. It's practically an invitation." "To what, darling? The gallows?" "Don't be melodramatic. Bill Wong will see I'm right." "You mean Sergeant Sensible?" "Detective Sergeant," she corrected, reaching for her handbag. "And he'll appreciate an update." "At midnight?" "He works odd hours," Roy groaned. "So does regret." But Agatha was already dialing. "Bill," she said when he answered, "it's me. Listen, I've got information." A pause, followed by a sigh audible through the line. "Agatha, have you been drinking?" "Of course not. Well, maybe. But this is important. Jessica Tate was investigating land near Charles Fraith's estate, and I think—" "Stop right there," said Bill. "You think too much. Go to bed, Agatha." "I'll have you know my intuition has solved more. Good night." The line clicked. Agatha stared at the receiver, affronted. "Rude," she muttered. Roy smirked. "Men in authority always find you exhausting. It's part of your charm." "Another word and you're sleeping with Hodge." "Tempting," said Roy. "He looks cleaner than the sofa." By the time they staggered home through the drizzle, Agatha's indignation had mellowed into tipsy warmth. She unlocked the door, hung her coat, and declared, "Another triumph of intellect and endurance." "And gin," Roy added, "mostly intellect." Hodge greeted them with a long, judgmental stare. Roy bowed. "Evening, your furry majesty." Agatha poured water for herself, gin for him, and flopped into a chair. "We're getting close, Roy. Someone killed Jessica because of that land." "Or because she corrected their grammar," he said, yawning. "Possibly both." He disappeared up the stairs, muttering about drafty cottages. Agatha sat alone, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark, thinking of Jessica Tate, her crusading smile, her tidy letters to the Echo, her body found on a muddy stile. The clock ticked, the house settled. Eventually she sighed, rose, and went to bed. Morning arrived pale and sharp, with mist rising from the hedgerows. Agatha shuffled to the front window, nursing her hangover with black coffee. At first she thought her eyes were still blurry, but then she saw it. The garden gate stood ajar. She frowned. She was certain she'd latched it last night. Outside, the path was streaked with mud, fresh footprints leading up to her door and back again. Her stomach tightened. Roy was still asleep. Hodge snored faintly on the radiator. Agatha stepped onto the path, robe flapping in the cool air. The footprints were deep, distinct, a heavy tread, not her own. She knelt, touched the edge of one, damp, recent. A prickle ran down her spine. Someone had been there while she slept. She straightened, glancing towards the lane where mist curled like smoke. No movement, no sound, only the faint rustle of leaves. Agatha shut the gate firmly, her hand trembling slightly. Inside, Hodge stretched, indifferent. "Don't look so smug," she told him. "At least one of us is getting attention." She reached for the telephone, then hesitated. Bill would only scold, Charles would tease, and Mrs. Bloxby would worry. She poured another coffee instead. Outside, the footprints blurred slowly in the drizzle, as though the village itself preferred not to remember. Sunday dawned with a thin, colourless light that made even the Cotswolds look exhausted. Carsley lay quiet under a wash of drizzle, and Agatha Raisin, clutching her first cup of coffee, was trying to decide whether to feel frightened or flattered that someone had crept into her garden during the night. Hodge, ever unsympathetic, blinked from his perch on the windowsill. "You could at least pretend to care," she told him. "I might have been murdered in my bed." He yawned extravagantly, and Agatha sighed. It was difficult to maintain the glamour of danger in front of a cat. The ring of the telephone startled her. She snatched it up, half expecting Charles, but Bill Wong's voice came instead, clipped, official, and not pleased. "Agatha, stay home. And before you ask, no, I'm not saying that to be patronizing." "You usually are," she said. "What's happened?" "Another body, Dovedale Wood this time, male, mid-20s, found early this morning by a dog walker." Her pulse quickened. "Gary Beach?" Bill hesitated. "Yes, the same cause of death as Jessica Tate. And before you get ideas, this is police business. Stay out of it." "Bill, you can't expect me—" "I can and do. We'll be interviewing everyone from that hiking club again. And if you so much as breathe near the scene, I'll have you arrested for obstruction." He hung up before she could answer. Agatha stared at the receiver, a wicked gleam lighting her eyes. Arrested for obstruction, indeed. He might as well have engraved an invitation. An hour later, she was hammering on Charles Fraith's front door. He opened it in a dressing gown, hair tousled, expression resigned. "Don't tell me," he said. "Someone's died and you're taking me with you." "Dovedale Wood," said Agatha. "Gary Beach. Same as Jessica." "And you're planning to what? Collect clues before breakfast?" "Precisely." Charles groaned but fetched his coat. "You do realize we'll end up explaining ourselves to the police again." "They should be grateful," said Agatha briskly. "We're practically unpaid consultants." Dovedale Wood was less than a mile from Dembley, a dark pocket of trees where the footpath dipped before climbing towards open fields. Police tape fluttered like bunting in the mist. Uniformed officers blocked the main track. But Agatha led Charles along a side trail screened by brambles. "You know," he said, ducking under a branch, "most people spend Sunday mornings reading the Telegraph." "I've never been most people." The undergrowth opened to a small clearing. From there they could see activity ahead, white suits moving around a cordoned patch of earth, flashes of camera bulbs, Bill's familiar figure standing with arms folded. Agatha strained for a better look. A sheet covered the body, but she caught a glimpse of Gary's hiking boot protruding. For a moment, the sight pierced her excitement. He'd been arrogant, flirtatious, even unpleasant, but alive. Charles, sensing her silence, said quietly, "He was young. Stupid, but young." Agatha nodded. "That makes 2 murders. If the police still call it coincidence, they deserve village council work." They retreated before Bill spotted them. Halfway down the path, something glinted near a fallen log. Agatha bent to retrieve it. A cracked plastic compass, mud-caked and crushed underfoot. Etched faintly on its side were 2 initials. D.C. "Deborah Camden," she breathed. "Or David Copperfield," said Charles. "Don't be obtuse. It's hers." He took it from her and examined the break. Could have been anyone's. These things sell in every camping shop. "You can be astonishingly unhelpful," she said. "We're keeping it." "For what purpose? Paperweight? Souvenir?" "Evidence." "Which you're stealing from a crime scene." "Borrowing," she said sweetly. By afternoon, the village was humming again. News of Gary's death had spread faster than Sunday sermon gossip. The Red Lion was crowded, the air thick with disbelief and covert satisfaction. "Terrible," murmured Doris Simpson to Agatha at the bar. "And such a handsome lad. Mind you, too free with his hands, if you know what I mean." "I don't," said Agatha, "but I'm sure you'll tell me." "Well, Mrs. Withers caught him, and that Deborah woman in the back of the pub once. Not that I'd repeat it." "You just did," Doris smiled modestly. "Only to you, of course." Agatha ordered gin and tonic, ignoring the stares that followed her to the table where Charles waited. "You're becoming notorious," he murmured. "Everyone's wondering when you'll find the next corpse." "You're not helping," she snapped. Across the room, Deborah entered, pale, eyes shadowed. Conversation dimmed. She sat alone, staring into her glass as though trying to find forgiveness at the bottom. Agatha approached with the delicacy of a bulldozer. "Terrible business," she began. Deborah flinched. "I can't talk about it." "You must feel dreadful. He was friendly with you, wasn't he?" "He was friendly with everyone." Agatha produced the cracked compass from her handbag. "Recognize this?" Deborah's face drained of colour. "Where did you get that?" "Dovedale Wood." "Then it's not mine," she said quickly. "I lost mine weeks ago. Anyone could have had it." "And your initials just happen to be D.C. It stands for Dovedale Club, said Deborah. We ordered a batch for everyone. Agatha stared, frustrated. She might be telling the truth, but Deborah's trembling hands and averted gaze were as good as a confession to Agatha's mind. Charles, seeing her expression, intervened. Come along, Aggie. Let the poor woman drink in peace. She's hiding something. So are most of us, he said lightly. Outside, dusk had fallen early. They walked back through the village, Agatha's mood caught between curiosity and dread. 2 people dead. A missing map. Now a compass linking both deaths, perhaps. Suppose, she said, Gary was blackmailing someone. Jessica finds out and threatens to expose it. He kills her, then gets killed himself. You've been reading too much, Christie, said Charles. At least she got results, she retorted. When they reached her cottage, Bill Wong's car was parked outside. He stood by the gate, expression thunderous. You've been at the scene, he said flatly. Nonsense, said Agatha. A witness saw you near Dovedale Wood. Bird watching, she lied. With Charles Fraith? He's my bird expert. Charles gave a helpless grin. Rare species, Sergeant. Bill groaned. Agatha, for once in your life, stay clear. 2 people are dead. This isn't a game. Who said it was? I'm only stretching my legs. Stretch them anywhere else, he said, climbing into his car. Next time I'll make it official. He drove off, tires spitting gravel. Agatha stood glowering after him. Honestly, you'd think he'd be grateful. Charles smiled faintly. For what? Tampering with evidence? For showing initiative. Men hate that. Especially policemen. Inside, the cottage smelled of damp wool and feline disapproval. Hodge was sprawled across the sofa like a minor monarch. Agatha fed him absent-mindedly, still replaying the day. Deborah's denial, the compass, Bill's fury, all threads of a pattern not yet visible. She poured gin, sat by the fire and stared into the flames. A second death should have frightened her, but instead it stirred something almost exhilarating, the sense of being necessary again. People might whisper, but they'd come to her soon enough. Hodge leapt into her lap, heavy and warm. She stroked his fur and murmured, Don't worry, darling. I'll find out who's killing our ramblers. It's only fair. They've already ruined my weekend wardrobe. He purred, unimpressed by human ambition. Outside, the rain returned, soft and persistent, washing the paths clean once more. Morning in Carsley arrived soft and deceptive, all sunlight on wet cobbles and bird-song pretending virtue. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen counter, elbow-deep in chaos, wondering why on earth she had decided to host a tea. Hodge, stretched across the table, eyed the trifle dish with a cynical gleam. It's strategy, Agatha told him, not hospitality. He flicked his tail. The plan, such as it was, had come to her the previous night between gin and insomnia. If she couldn't pry secrets from the hikers one by one, she'd trap them all together, with sponge cake and gossip as bait. Roy Silver, summoned by telephone threat, arrived first. He surveyed the table. Shop-bought scones and sandwiches, a supermarket quiche, and a trifle she'd assembled badly that was already listing to port, and gasped. Darling, are you feeding them or poisoning them? Hikers eat anything, said Agatha. They burn it off by being sanctimonious. He kissed the air near her cheek. And which of the suspects will we be charming today? Deborah, Martin, Mrs. Withers, and Pauline from the pub. They all said yes, though heaven knows why. Roy grinned. Because you're terrifying. People always accept invitations from terrifying women. By 3 o'clock, the first knock sounded. Deborah entered in a neat cardigan, and that air of forced cheer people wear to funerals. Martin followed, grumbling about parking. Mrs. Withers came next, all beige piety and damp umbrella. Pauline Gifford, the landlady, was last. Sleek hair, tight smile, perfume too strong for daylight. Do come in, said Agatha, brandishing the teapot as if it might explode. Roy, pour something civilized. Roy obeyed, though his idea of civilization involved generous sherry measures. The drawing-room filled with the clink of china and the brittle music of politeness. So tragic about young Gary, murmured Deborah. And Jessica, said Mrs. Withers, crossing herself. Such good people. Oh, yes, said Pauline flatly. The sort that ruin everyone else's fun. Agatha perked up. Ruined your fun, did she? Pauline gave a short laugh. She threatened to report me for serving wine on club walks. Said it set a bad example. How very noble of her, said Martin. She nearly got me fined over that trespass nonsense last year. Mrs. Withers blinked. Trespass? She claimed our route crossed private land, wrote letters to the parish clerk. Agatha's ears pricked. Letters. She made a mental note. Roy leaned forward, voice honeyed. She sounds quite the reformer. And poor Gary, so young, so vigorous. Too vigorous, muttered Pauline. Mrs. Withers gasped. You mean, oh, you and he— Don't be absurd, said Pauline. But the flicker in her eyes told its own story. Martin coughed into his cup. Well, I hope the police don't drag me into it again. I've done nothing wrong. They always say that, murmured Roy, and Agatha kicked him under the table. The room grew stuffy with tension and trifle. Rain began tapping against the window as if joining in. More tea? Said Agatha brightly. A tiny drop, said Mrs. Withers, just to steady the nerves. She took rather more than a drop. Roy's hand slipped, and within 10 minutes her cheeks had turned the colour of boiled beetroot. I tell you, she announced, rising unsteadily, Jessica Tate thought she could boss the Almighty himself. She'd have told St. Peter to wipe his feet before entering heaven. Sit down, dear, said Deborah. I will not. That woman criticised my sponge at the fete. Then, with tragic inevitability, she swayed, sighed, and collapsed into the trifle bowl. Then, with tragic inevitability, she swayed, sighed, and collapsed into the trifle bowl, and the room's brittle civility finally shattered. Roy clapped a hand over his mouth. Is she— Fainted, said Agatha. From outrage or sherry, take your pick. Martin stood abruptly. I've had enough of this circus. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the spoon rack rattled. For a moment, only the rain spoke. Then Pauline gave a slow, humourless laugh. Well done, Mrs. Raisin. You've given the village a new story already. Better than the old one, said Agatha. Pauline rose, smoothing her skirt. If the police ask, I'll tell them this was a wake. It's about as cheerful as one. She left, perfume trailing behind her like accusation. When the guests were gone, and Mrs. Withers had been revived and escorted home by Roy, Agatha slumped into a chair, cigarette trembling between her fingers. That went well, said Roy. Don't start. I particularly admired the moment of symbolic death by trifle. Very Shakespearean. You poured the sherry, she snapped. Darling, I pour hope into hopeless lives. Agatha glared, but her irritation was tinged with amusement. Chaos always followed her, but today had been productive. Secrets had surfaced. Envy, resentment, whispers of trespass and wine. Jessica Tate, moral crusader, had clearly been less beloved than mourned. Outside, the rain eased to a mist. Through the lace curtain she saw a movement at the gate. A figure lingered, slim, motionless. Pauline Gifford. She was smoking, watching the cottage as if waiting for it to reveal something. Then she turned and vanished down the lane. Agatha frowned. What do you make of that? Roy joined her at the window. The lady has guilt written all over her handbag. Or curiosity, said Agatha. People watch what frightens them. Roy stretched. Speaking of fright, you're rather good at it. That poor solicitor nearly swallowed his umbrella. Martin's hiding something too, said Agatha. I'll bet my best lipstick it's to do with money. So, to summarize, said Roy, ticking off on his fingers, Jessica was a saintly meddler, Gary was a charming menace, Pauline's a hypocrite, Martin's shady, Deborah's nervous, and the widow's drunk. That's the countryside, said Agatha. Everyone virtuous until proven otherwise. The next morning smelled of damp grass and stale cake. Agatha padded downstairs in her dressing gown, the post uncollected and her head aching from too much gossip and too little satisfaction. Hodge was crouched beneath the sofa, tail flicking. He emerged triumphantly with a crumpled scrap of paper clinging to his paw. If that's another mouse receipt from the butcher, keep it, she said. He dropped it at her feet anyway. The paper was thin, torn, faintly scented of lavender and dust. A corner of official letterhead showed, Parish Council of Dembley. Agatha unfolded it carefully. Most of the text was missing, but the remaining line read, Trespass fees to be collected from private walkers using Fraith land. Her eyes widened. Charles again. The same thread tugged at the centre of everything. Jessica's campaign, Gary's blackmail, the missing map, and now trespass fees. Roy entered, hair dishevelled, wearing her spare dressing gown. Morning, darling. Do I smell burnt toast or ambition? She held up the paper. Look at this. Jessica wrote to the parish clerk about charging walkers for using Charles's property. If she'd discovered he'd leased parts illegally. He'd be furious, said Roy, or worse, desperate. Roy gave her a look. You don't think Charles? Don't be silly. Charles wouldn't kill anyone. He'd hire someone to do it neatly. Comforting, said Roy. She tucked the note into her pocket. I'm seeing Mrs. Blocksby later. She'll know if the parish kept copies of Jessica's letters. And if she doesn't? I'll ask the clerk myself. Kindly remind me to wear something that suggests authority. Try armour, he muttered. That afternoon, Mrs. Blocksby received her with mild surprise and her usual calm tea service. A gathering, Agatha? At your cottage? You are full of enterprise. Full of indigestion, more like, said Agatha. But it worked. They argued like ferrets in a sack. Mrs. Blocksby smiled. Sometimes tempers reveal more than reason does. You're telling me. Pauline all but admitted to, well, something, and Martin looked ready to combust. And now this. She produced the torn letter. Mrs. Blocksby read it, frowning. Trespass fees. Yes, I recall Jessica campaigning to make walkers pay for maintenance of paths. Some thought it sensible, others called it blackmail. Blackmail's a strong word, said Agatha. Only if the motives are pure, said the vicar's wife gently. Agatha sipped her tea, staring into the cup. She disliked how easily Mrs. Blocksby could turn her boldness into doubt. You think I'm meddling again, don't you? I think you care more than you admit, said Mrs. Blocksby. But be careful. Country virtue can be a mask. Agatha rose, pocketing the letter. I'll remember that when I see their faces. Just remember to look at your own, too, said Mrs. Blocksby kindly. That evening the cottage was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the faint hiss of rain on leaves. Agatha sat at her desk, examining the torn letter under lamplight. She traced the words with her fingertip, imagining Jessica's tidy hand and firm self-righteousness. You stirred the nest, didn't you, my dear? She murmured. And someone made sure you stopped. Hodge leapt onto her lap, eyes bright, fur smelling faintly of dust and triumph. She stroked him absently. If only the police had your instincts, she said. He purred, unimpressed by human irony. Outside, the drizzle thickened, silvering the garden. Inside, Agatha lit another cigarette, the tip glowing in the half-dark. Her reflection in the window looked back, smudged, restless, amused. Country manners, she whispered. All smiles until someone charges a fee. She exhaled smoke, watching it curl like the secrets she intended to uncover. Carsley woke to a thin frost and the kind of pale sunshine that only deceives the careless. Agatha Raisin was not careless by nature, though she was currently wrestling with the deceit of her conscience. It was telling her to leave the matter of Jessica Tate well alone. Her curiosity, however, had never listened to good advice. She was halfway through her second cigarette when the telephone rang. Bill Wong's voice came through, weary and flat. We need to talk. Can I come round? You've finally decided I'm useful. I've decided you're unavoidable. 10 minutes later, his police car was outside her cottage, tyres crunching the frosty lane. Agatha greeted him with coffee and the kind of expression that suggested magnanimity under duress. You've found something, she said. Bill placed a folder on the table. Jessica wrote to the parish council about fencing, said certain paths on Fraith land were illegally closed off. She wanted them reopened for walkers. Agatha's brows shot up. Fraith land? As in Charles Fraith? Bill nodded. He's under review. Don't look so shocked. I'm not shocked, she lied, lighting another cigarette. Just furious. Keep out of it, Agatha. You might as well tell the wind not to blow, she said, reaching for the folder. Bill sighed. If you insist on getting involved, at least bring a torch. I've arranged to walk the site this evening. You can tag along, unofficially. Agatha smiled. You say the most romantic things. By late afternoon, she had cornered Charles at his manor. He was sitting in the library, reading the Telegraph with the air of a man untouched by scandal. Charles, she said, storming in, what exactly have you been fencing off? He looked up, amused. Good heavens, is that a metaphor or an accusation? Both. She threw the council letter onto the table. He read it without surprise. Ah, that. Perfectly harmless arrangement. I leased a few acres to a developer. Temporary measure. Nobody used that path anyway. Jessica Tate used it, Agatha said sharply. And look where that got her, he murmured. You leased public land. That's illegal. Technicality, said Charles. Besides, the developer's already withdrawn. There's nothing left but paperwork and indignation. Agatha's anger faltered. He looked genuinely unconcerned, even faintly embarrassed. "You should have told me," she said. "My dear, you'd only have shouted sooner." "True," she admitted. He rose, offering her a conciliatory drink. "Don't fret. I'll speak to the police tomorrow. Tonight, I'll even accompany you and Bill to the site, moral support." "And guilt management?" "Possibly both." Dusk bled quickly into night. The fields near Fraith Manor lay under a mist that turned hedges to ghosts. Bill met them at the lane's end, his torch beam slicing through the gloom. "Stay close," he said. "The stile Jessica used is beyond the copse." "You sound like a Boy Scout leader," muttered Agatha. Charles followed with aristocratic reluctance, holding his torch as though it might dirty him. Agatha trudged ahead, boots squelching, the cold seeping through her coat. "If I die of pneumonia," she told Bill, "you'll be charged with accessory to murder." "You'll survive. You always do." "Flattering," she said. They reached the stile, or what remained of it. The top plank hung broken, one post splintered clean through. Bill crouched, running a gloved hand over the break. "Deliberate," he said. "Clean cut, sawed halfway through. Anyone climbing would have fallen hard." Agatha knelt beside him, scanning the mud with her torch. "And Jessica did." Charles shifted uncomfortably. "I swear I didn't—" "Relax," said Agatha. "You're too lazy for manual sabotage." He smiled faintly. "A compliment of sorts." Something glinted near the fence. Agatha moved closer, brushing away leaves. A small strap lay twisted in the mud, torn, mud-spattered, with a faint plastic buckle still attached. Bill shone his light. "What's that?" "Compass strap," said Agatha. "Exactly like the one on Deborah Camden's compass." "You're sure?" "Certain. I bought one once for a keep-fit phase, lasted 3 days." Bill took the strap, frowning. "Deborah said she lost hers weeks ago." "Then she's losing more than accessories," said Agatha. Charles looked at the dark trees beyond. "Perhaps we should call it a night. This place feels—" "Haunted," she said. "Perfectly safe, except for the murderer still wandering about." "Comforting as ever," murmured Charles. They began the trek back, torches wavering. Halfway through the field, Agatha's beam flickered and died. "Blast, batteries." "You never come prepared," said Bill. "Nonsense, I brought charm and intuition." "Try bringing Duracell next time." Charles's torch blinked out in sympathy. For a moment, they were swallowed by darkness and the smell of damp earth. "Charles," said Agatha sharply, "stop breathing on my neck. I'm several feet away." "Then who—" A twig snapped. All three froze. Bill swung his remaining torch. The beam caught movement, a figure darting between trees, coat flaring, then vanishing toward the lane. "Hey!" Bill shouted, but the sound died quickly in the mist. They gave chase for a few yards before sense returned. The figure was gone, leaving only churned mud and the echo of footsteps. "Someone's been watching us," said Agatha, breathless. "Probably the same someone who broke that stile." "And they didn't want us to see them," said Bill. "No, darling," said Charles dryly. "They merely enjoy evening jogs through murder sites." Bill slipped the torn strap into an evidence bag, marker pen squeaking as he labelled it. "We'll check for prints in the morning." Agatha tugged her coat tighter. "If Deborah's behind this, she's either terrified or guilty." "Or both," said Charles. Back at the cottage, the fire hissed comfortingly. Hodge was asleep on the armchair, tail curled like punctuation. Agatha poured gin with trembling hands. "That was stupid," she said aloud. "Which part?" asked Charles. "All of it." She took a drink. "Jessica was murdered there. Gary too. Whoever did it knew the paths better than anyone. The fencing, the stile, it's all connected." Bill sat opposite her, expression unreadable. "You realize you've just implicated half of Gloucestershire." "That's progress," said Agatha. Charles stretched, yawning. "May I go home now, or must we form a night watch?" "Go," she said. "I'm too cross to be grateful." He bent to kiss her cheek, a gesture halfway between apology and amusement. "Try not to get killed before breakfast." "You'd miss me," she said. "Like toothache," he murmured, and was gone. When the door closed, Agatha slumped by the fire. Bill lingered, rubbing his temples. "You're convinced Deborah's involved?" "Her strap's at the scene. She lied about losing it. She's missing, isn't she?" Bill hesitated. "Her neighbours haven't seen her since yesterday." Agatha's pulse quickened. then she's the next victim. Or she's hiding. Which suggests guilt or fear. He stood. Either way, I'll file a report. And Agatha, thanks for not dying tonight. You're welcome. It was a near thing. When he left, the cottage fell silent again except for the ticking clock and Hodge's steady purr. Agatha stared into the fire, smoke curling from her cigarette. Beneath the satisfaction of discovery, something softer stirred. Disappointment, perhaps. Charles had lied, but not maliciously. She could forgive deceit more easily than indifference. She reached down to scratch Hodge's ear. Men, my dear, are like field gates. Pretty to look at, useless in practice. He yawned. Agatha smiled faintly, the smoke wreathing her reflection in the window. Out beyond the hedges, the fields lay quiet under frost, concealing their secrets once more. The morning broke mild and wet, that special Cotswold drizzle which managed to be both invisible and soaking. Agatha Raisin stood at her cottage window, cigarette in hand, watching water drip from the rosebush like an accusation. Hodge sat on the sill beside her, tail twitching, unimpressed by weather or morality. She was in the midst of deciding whether to dress as country casual or village authority when the telephone rang. Bill Wong's voice sounded tired. We've found Deborah Camden. Alive? For now. She turned up at the surgery at 7, claiming someone tried to run her down on the Mercester Road. And do you believe her? Let's say I'm open-minded, which is more than you usually are. Ha! I'm positively saintly, said Agatha, already reaching for her coat. Deborah sat in the surgery waiting room, pale, eyes rimmed red. She looked 10 years older than she had at Agatha's ill-fated tea. Her cardigan hung loose, mud up to the hem. Mrs. Raisin, she whispered as Agatha entered. It was awful. Headlights coming straight at me. I had to jump the ditch. What were you doing walking out there at night? I couldn't sleep. I went to clear my head. You mean to hide something, said Agatha softly. Deborah flinched. You think I'm lying? I think you're frightened of the wrong person. Bill arrived then, looking as though he'd had 3 hours sleep and one too many reports. We'll take your statement, Miss Camden, he said. And please, no dramatic flourishes this time. She bristled, but fear still clung to her like smoke. Agatha leaned close to Bill. You're too hard on her. She's told 3 versions already. In one the car was blue, in another green. Now it's dark. You see my problem. You always want consistency, Bill. People aren't soup recipes. He gave her a look. And you always want drama. Promise me you won't make it worse. I never make things worse, said Agatha, which was a lie so old it had grown comfortable. By afternoon, Carsley was once again humming like a wasp's nest. Mrs. Bloxby telephoned to say that half the Women's Institute were in the Red Lion discussing Deborah's miraculous escape. Agatha naturally joined them. The pub was warm, scented with beer and gossip. Doris Simpson waved her over. You've heard, of course. Terrible business. They say Deborah was meeting someone that night. Who says? Everyone, said Doris, which in Carsley counted as evidence. And Pauline Gifford's been in a right state. Someone saw her and Deborah arguing outside the shop. Something about letters. Letters? Yes, to the paper. Jessica wrote them before she died, all about public rights of way. But apparently one was printed with Pauline's name by mistake. Agatha's eyes narrowed. That would annoy anyone with something to hide. Exactly. And she's been snapping at everyone since. Agatha smiled faintly. Gossip might be a vice, but it was also an art form. That evening, Bill arrived at her door, damp and exasperated. I suppose you've heard everything already. Of course. I'm considering printing a newsletter. Don't. He leaned against the mantelpiece. We're organising another club walk tomorrow morning. Same route as before. I want to observe them together. Agatha's eyes gleamed. A trap. An observation. Same thing, only with better clothes. He groaned. Fine, but you'll behave. I'll be an angel. That's what frightens me, said Bill. Morning came with low mist curling through the fields. The surviving members of the Dembley Hiking Club gathered outside the Rambler's Rest, subdued and jumpy. Deborah, pale but present, stood apart, flanked by Mrs. Withers. Pauline Gifford hovered near the doorway, her expression brittle as cracked glass. Agatha, wearing what she described as sensible chic, a waterproof coat, lipstick and entirely unsuitable shoes, took her place beside Bill. All right, everyone, he announced. Just a short walk today, Stick together. They set off along the familiar path. Conversation was thin. Mud sucked at their boots. Agatha watched Pauline out of the corner of her eye, nervous, scanning the hedgerows as though the fields might rise up to accuse her. Halfway up the hill, Agatha struck. "Funny thing," she said loudly. "Bill tells me they found fingerprints on that torn map." She smiled sweetly. It was a bluff, but a useful one. Bill shot her a warning look, but she continued blithely. Apparently very distinctive ones. Belonged to a woman who handled paper often, perhaps a publican who keeps ledgers. Pauline froze. "That's nonsense. The map was gone before—" "Before what?" said Agatha. "Before Jessica stuck her nose in where it wasn't wanted." Pauline's voice cracked. "She was going to ruin me, claiming I sold off rights of way. She had no idea what that would do to my business." The group fell silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Bill stepped forward. "Mrs. Gifford, I think you'd better—" But Pauline had already turned and bolted across the field, boots slipping in the mud. "Blast," said Agatha, and followed, swearing as her heel sank. "Agatha," shouted Bill, "if you think I'm letting her take credit for drama in my case, you're mad." She stumbled after Pauline, the others trailing like a panicked procession. The field ahead was slick, the same treacherous slope where Jessica Tate had fallen. "Stop," Bill called. "It's dangerous." Pauline looked back once, eyes wild, face twisted with fury. "She shouldn't have written those letters. She made me the villain." "You did that yourself," said Agatha, breathless. Pauline took another step, slipped and vanished over the edge. There was a brief, awful silence, then the dull sound of impact below. Bill reached her side first, sliding down the bank with practiced control. Agatha followed less gracefully, landing in a splatter of mud. Pauline lay half-submerged in the ditch, motionless. Bill checked her pulse, jaw tightening. "She's gone," he said quietly. Agatha stared. The same ditch, the same end. The rain began again, soft and relentless, washing over Pauline's still face. "Poetic," she murmured, "and utterly pointless." Bill gave her a look that was both weary and kind. Sometimes justice is messy. "So is mud," said Agatha, attempting to stand. "Help me up before I drown in irony." The police swarmed in, statements were taken, and by late afternoon the village was already buzzing anew. The Dembley Club murders, as the Echo promptly christened them, became the latest moral tale about ambition, greed, and the hazards of fresh air. Agatha spent the evening trying to clean her ruined shoes, listening to Hodge's disinterested purring. Bill stopped by on his way home, carrying a paper bag of fish and chips. "Dinner," he said. "You look like you need it." "And possibly divine absolution," said Agatha, accepting the bag. He sat opposite her. Pauline confessed enough for the record. The land sales were illegal. Jessica found out and threatened exposure. Gary tried to blackmail her about it, so she lured him out later and silenced him too. The irony is she slipped because she couldn't resist confronting you. "She'd have made a dreadful journalist," said Agatha. "Couldn't leave a story unfinished." They ate in companionable quiet for a while. Outside, the rain drummed its slow confession on the window. "You did well," said Bill finally. "I tricked her into confessing," she said. "That's not exactly heroic." "It's effective." "That's my charm." He smiled faintly. "You'll never learn, will you?" "Not if I can help it." When he left, Agatha tidied up with unusual care. The adrenaline had faded, leaving the familiar ache of victory laced with emptiness. The truth had been found, the killer caught, and yet life, perversely, remained ordinary. She poured herself a small gin and sat by the fire. Hodge climbed into her lap, paws kneading her skirt. "You'd have been no help, you know," she told him. "Too busy judging." He blinked solemnly. Agatha smiled, lighting another cigarette. Smoke curled upwards in lazy spirals. "Perhaps," she mused aloud, "I should take up something safer, like pottery." Hodge sneezed delicately, as though in disbelief. "You're right," she said. "Danger suits me better." Outside, Carsley's lights glimmered through the drizzle, tranquil, deceitful, content to gossip again tomorrow. Agatha leaned back, exhaling smoke with a sigh that was half relief, half regret. The fire crackled, Hodge purred, and somewhere in the quiet between them, the village settled back into its comforting hypocrisy, waiting for the next scandal to bloom. The Cotswolds had washed itself clean overnight. Morning sun glittered on puddles, and Carsley looked deceptively wholesome, as if murder were merely a rumour brought in by the wind. Agatha Raisin, however, felt none of the freshness. She sat at her kitchen table in her dressing gown, staring into a mug of lukewarm coffee as if it contained moral instruction. Hodge leapt onto the table, landing beside the newspaper. The Mercester Echo headline screamed, "Pub landlady kills 2 in right-of-way row." "Subtle," said Agatha. She flicked ash into the saucer. Couldn't they at least call it Cotswold tragedy? Something tasteful. Hodge pawed the edge of the page. Beneath the headline was a small, unflattering photo of Agatha herself, mud-spattered, hair wild, mid-gesture. "They've made me look like I strangled her with my handbag," she muttered. The phone rang before she could crumple the paper. "Aggie," came Roy Silver's voice, shrill with triumph. "You're famous. I sold the exclusive to the Sunday Herald, front-page teaser and a double spread inside. Village sleuth unmasks killer hiker." "You what?" "Don't thank me yet. They've asked for your beauty regime tips." I told them gin and righteous fury. "You insufferable little—" "Relax, darling, it's good publicity. Everyone loves an amateur detective, and you do amateurism beautifully." Agatha hung up, breathing through her teeth. "One day," she told Hodge, "I'll commit a murder just to shut him up." Later that morning, Bill Wong appeared at her door, hat in hand, looking weary but faintly amused. "Came to thank you, officially," he said. "That makes a change. Usually you arrive to caution me." "Don't tempt me." He followed her into the sitting room. The air smelled faintly of stale smoke and victory. "So," she said, pouring him coffee, "it's all wrapped up neatly?" Pauline confessed. "Wrapped, yes. Neatly, no. The evidence nails it. Ledger entries for illegal leases, her prints on the pub's wall where the map hung, and messages arranging to meet Gary at Dovedale. Motive, means, opportunity. Said the debts were crushing, the pub failing, and Jessica's crusade pushed her over the edge. "Virtue is often vanity with a rucksack," said Agatha, lighting another cigarette. Bill smiled. "You should trademark that." "Perhaps Roy already has. The press are calling her the Rambler's Revenge Killer. God help us. They always need a catchy name. No one buys papers for quiet desperation." He stirred his coffee. "You were right about the fencing, though. Jessica's letter to the parish started it all. Pauline thought exposing the illegal leases would ruin her. She lashed out, one stupid shove, and Jessica was gone." Agatha exhaled smoke. "And Gary?" "Found out. Tried to cash in. She met him at Dovedale Wood under the pretense of paying him off. Hit him with a hiking pole." "Poetic symmetry," said Agatha dryly. "Killed by exercise." Bill gave her a look. "Promise me something." "Doubtful." "Next time let the police do their job." "And miss all the fun?" "You nearly got yourself killed." "Oh, don't be dramatic. You thrive on drama." She smiled faintly. "And you'd be bored without me." He rose, setting down his cup. "True, but I'd be calmer." At the door he paused. "Seriously, Agatha, good work." She blinked. Compliments from Bill were as rare as warm gin. "Thank you," she said almost shyly. "Just don't make it a habit." "Too late," she said. The village had gone half mad with excitement. By noon, photographers had appeared like migrating gulls, snapping the pub, the church, and any woman over 40 who would claim to know the deceased. Mrs. Bloxby telephoned to warn her. "They're asking if you're the local Miss Marple. I said you were younger." "Bless you," said Agatha. "And angrier," added Mrs. Bloxby gently. Agatha sighed. "They'll have to print corrections on both counts." She ventured to the Red Lion for lunch and immediately regretted it. Half the bar turned to stare. Doris Simpson beamed. "Our own detective," Doris cried. "I told them you'd solve it, Mrs. Raisin." "You told me I'd end up in jail," said Agatha. "Well, it's all the same sort of excitement, isn't it?" Charles Fraith strolled in then, immaculate as always, clearly enjoying himself. "Ah, the woman of the hour. May I buy the heroine a drink?" "I'm not a heroine. I'm exhausted." "Nonsense. You're glowing with self-righteousness." "That's perspiration. I've been chased by journalists all morning." "You do attract them. Fame suits you, if not your hair. Say another word and I'll drown you in sherry." He laughed, seating himself opposite. "Honestly, Agatha, you've done splendidly. The police might grumble, but you cracked it, and all without leaving the county." "Barely without leaving the sofa," she said, though secretly pleased. "How does it feel to have exercised justice at last?" If that's a joke about hiking, I'll throw this sandwich at you. Consider me warned. He raised his glass in mock salute to Mrs. Raisin, scourge of ramblers, saviour of public footpaths. Footpaths can rot, said Agatha. They've caused more trouble than they're worth. By late afternoon the reporters had thinned, the village quieted, and Agatha finally retreated to her cottage. She made herself a gin and tonic, kicked off her shoes, and allowed the silence to seep in. For the first time in days she felt flat. Triumph had the shelf life of milk. The puzzle was solved, but the satisfaction slipped away like water through fingers. Hodge mewed from the armchair. "Yes, you're right," she said. "I should be thrilled. The great Agatha Raisin, solving murders before lunch." He blinked slowly. "Don't look at me like that. I know I'm impossible." She rose, pacing. The mirror above the mantel caught her reflection, hair escaping its pins, lipstick smudged, eyes tired but bright. She studied herself with a wry smile. "You'd think solving crime would make one glamorous," she murmured. "Instead, I look like I've fought a hedge and lost." The doorbell rang. Charles again. He leaned on the frame, grinning. "Just came to check the famous detective hasn't expired from boredom." "Nearly." "Well, the Echo wants a follow-up piece. Shall I tell them you're writing your memoirs?" "Only if you want to be the first victim." He stepped inside, glancing at the chaos of newspapers and cigarette ends. "Charming domestic scene. You know, Agatha, if you ever turned this energy towards something peaceful, gardening, say, I'd bury you in it." "Splendid. At least I'd be near you." She rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. "You do realize," he said, lounging against the fireplace, "that half the county now sees you as the terror of Gloucestershire." "Let them. Keeps them polite," he chuckled. "You're impossible. And yet you're here. Touché." After a comfortable silence, he straightened. "Well, I must dash. Try not to find another corpse before Sunday." "No promises," said Agatha. When he'd gone, she sat back down, the humour fading into something quieter. The room smelled of gin, wood smoke, and faint loneliness, her usual perfume. The evening crept in gently, the village lights flickering on one by one. Agatha stood at the window, curtain half drawn, watching the distant line of hills dissolve into dusk. On the ridge above Carsley, tiny figures moved, hikers, silhouettes against the paling sky. She could almost hear their cheerful calls drifting through the still air. "Idiots," she muttered. Hodge stirred on the chair, stretching luxuriously. "Don't start lecturing me," she said. "They'll twist an ankle or worse. But no, they'll go marching off again next weekend, full of moral fibre and sandwiches." He yawned. Agatha smiled faintly, lighting her final cigarette of the day. The flame reflected in the window, a small defiant spark against the fading light. "All that talk of fresh air," she murmured. "See where it got them." Hodge padded to her side, curling round her ankles. She reached down, scratching his head. "At least you appreciate indoor pursuits," she said. The cigarette burned low, the room grew soft with shadows, and outside the last walkers disappeared over the hill, tiny, determined, and blissfully unaware that Agatha Raisin was still watching, judging, and secretly rather fond of them all. A thin drizzle hung over Carsley, soft as muslin and twice as persistent. The village looked freshly washed and faintly self-satisfied, like someone who'd survived scandal with their hair intact. Agatha Raisin, however, was in no mood for smugness. Her cottage felt too quiet. The phone had stopped ringing, the reporters had melted away, and even Roy Silver had finally exhausted his adjectives. Hodge sat on the windowsill, staring out at the dripping lane with the superior calm of one who'd never risked life or lipstick for a headline. Agatha sighed, lighting a cigarette. "Well, Hodge, that's that. 2 corpses, 1 confession, and not a single thank-you bouquet." He blinked, unimpressed. "You're right," she said. "Bouquets die anyway, rather like my social life." The kettle whistled, startling her back into movement. She made tea the way she always did, too strong, too fast, and sat with it at the kitchen table. The clock ticked companionably. Peace, she realized, could be every bit as unnerving as peril. By mid-morning, Mrs. Bloxby arrived bearing scones and moral perspective. She came in without knocking, as was her gentle right, and set the basket on the table. "You look tired, Mrs. Raisin," she said, untying her headscarf. "Or perhaps simply victorious." "A bit of both." Possibly neither. Agatha poured tea into a second cup. The whole thing's left me feeling rather hollow. That's natural after excitement. You've been living on nerves and nicotine. And gin, said Agatha helpfully. Mrs. Blocksby smiled. I didn't like to mention it. They ate in companionable quiet. Outside, a sparrow fussed at the puddle on the path. You know, said Mrs. Blocksby at last, you might allow yourself a little rest. No more adventures for a while. Rest? Agatha snorted. In Carsley. Everyone's waiting for the next scandal. If no one provides one, they'll invent it. Then perhaps invent something harmless, said the vicar's wife. A new Women's Institute fundraiser, perhaps. Fundraisers don't come with suspects, Agatha muttered. They do come with cake. Tempting, but no. Mrs. Blocksby folded her napkin. Still, you did splendidly, whatever Bill Wong may say. And you mustn't let loneliness set in. You're very much admired, you know. Agatha gave a sharp laugh. Admired? They admire the story, not me. People like their heroines tidy. I'm more of a smudge. A vivid one, said Mrs. Blocksby kindly. After she left, the cottage seemed smaller again. Agatha wandered from room to room, straightening things that didn't need straightening. She tried to read, failed, and turned instead to staring out the window at the village green. Carsley was behaving itself, Doris Simpson sweeping her step, the postman whistling, the world ticking politely forward. Agatha felt left behind, as if everyone else had resumed a life she'd misplaced. The telephone rang. She pounced. Mrs. Raisin, this is Councillor Bates from the parish office. A pleasure at last to speak to our local celebrity. Is it? Said Agatha, already wary. Indeed. The council thought you'd be the perfect person to open our new project, the Agatha Raisin Nature Trail, a delightful stroll linking all the historic footpaths. Your name, of course, is an honorary touch. Agatha stared at the receiver as if it had insulted her intelligence. A nature trail, she repeated, after 2 murders on hiking routes. Quite. It'll draw visitors. And possibly more corpses. Oh, surely not. Do say yes, it's next Sunday. No, Mr. Bates. Nature has already tried to kill me once. I shan't give it a second chance. She hung up before he could protest, then laughed, a short, dry sound that startled even Hodge. You see, my dear, she told him, that's how notoriety begins. First a trail, then a waxwork. I'd rather be alive and ignored. Evening came early, the sky fading to pewter. Agatha poured herself a small gin and settled by the fire. The day's mail lay unopened on the table, mostly circulars and 1 letter from Roy with the word "fabulous" underlined twice. She ignored it, preferring silence. Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling. Her thoughts wandered, to Jessica, to Pauline, to all the ridiculous motives that seemed grand until they ended in handcuffs. Pride, vanity, fear, and the occasional shove in the dark. She smiled faintly. Perhaps she wasn't so different. She too wanted attention, admiration, to be seen. Only she preferred her victims metaphorical. Hodge jumped onto her lap, settling with a satisfied sigh. We're both incorrigible, aren't we? She said. Me with my meddling, you with your hairballs. He began to purr, the smug rhythm of contentment. Agatha looked out at the twilight, the hedgerows glistening after rain, the faint lamp over the vicarage door, the calm that followed other people's disasters. It's too peaceful, she murmured. That's the trouble with happy endings. She stubbed out her cigarette, then, on second thought, lit another. The flame flared briefly, a small rebellion against the settling dark. Somewhere down the lane, a church bell chimed 6. Agatha took a sip of gin and smiled wryly. Here's to peace, she said. May it last 5 minutes. Hodge purred louder, as if in agreement. The drizzle returned, tapping softly at the windows. The fire hissed, the cat stretched, and Agatha Raisin, vain, restless, undefeated, sat watching the Cotswold evening close over Carsley like a quilt, certain that quiet was only ever temporary.